Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate today in this joint symposium hosted by RIETI and the Australian National University, ANU, titled Asia's Response to Great Power Disruption and Global Economic Disorder. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to say a few words. This marks the 10th joint symposium between RIETI and ANU. This symposium was planned and organized with the cooperation of Professor Shiro Armstrong of the Crawford School of Public Policy at ANU and a non-resident fellow at RIETI, in collaboration with Professor Shujiro Urata, Professor Emeritus at Waseda University and Chairman Emeritus and Distinguished Senior Fellow, specially appointed at RIETI. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to both professors for their dedicated efforts in making this event possible. In today's rapidly changing, uncertain, and complex international political economic environment, Indo-Pacific countries, which are highly dependent on trade and investment, are facing increasingly complex policy choices to ensure continued development and prosperity. This symposium will examine how Indo-Pacific countries are responding to rising risks stemming from both the United States and China. It will explore regional dynamics, assess policy responses, and develop strategies. Key themes will include strengthening supply chains, rethinking global and regional trade strategies, and enhancing economic security. The purpose of today's symposium is to discuss these important themes with stakeholders from Japan, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, and India to examine the most appropriate policy directions. First, Mr. Takehiko MATSUO of Vice Minister for International Affairs at METI will deliver the keynote speech. In the subsequent panel discussion, the first session will be on the topic of supply chain resilience, and the second session will be on the topic of the international economic order. Today's symposium will last 3 hours, and I am confident that the discussions will provide many insights based on the various perspectives of the presenters. I would like to once again express my gratitude to everyone who has taken the time to speak at the event, and to all the participants. This concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction. Chairman FUKAO, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to speak at this important symposium today. I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to RIETI and ANU. In my remarks, I'd like to address 3 points. First, the current situation, and second, the necessary measures to ensure the resilience of supply chains, particularly the diversification of suppliers. And finally, the future of the international economic order, taking these factors into account. First, regarding the current situation, I believe we first widely felt the risks of supply disruption in internationally connected supply chains during the COVID-19 pandemic. And next came Russia's invasion of Ukraine. With the invasion, the risks associated with the dependence on Russian energy resources became apparent. Now, 3 years after the invasion began, Western countries have realized that the defense industrial base was insufficient to sustain a prolonged war, particularly in terms of ammunition supply and others. On the other hand, Looking at the actions of two superpowers, US and China, we see that China has built excess production capacity in various sectors, leading to a global oversupply issue. Additionally, China has been tightening its export control regarding critical minerals and rare earths, and further regulatory enhancement was just announced last week. The United States introduced a series of additional tariffs with the aim of restoring trade imbalance and bringing manufacturing back to the US. It's undeniable that both the US and China are motivated by a desire to build a resilient supply chain for critical materials and to reduce risks associated with a dependence on other countries. On the other hand, it is also true that these three countries' measures have had serious implications for the economies and supply chains of other countries. So what is needed to build resilient supply chain? This is the second topic. Japan experienced a ban on rare earth exports by the Chinese government about 15 years ago. At that time, Japan secured a substantial budget to support upstream investments to ensure alternative production capacity for rare earths. As a result of this government support, the Linus project began operations. However, shortly thereafter, market price dropped, leading to significant operational difficulties from the outset. The Linus project managed to overcome this difficult situation thanks to continued government support, but subsequent companies following Linus project found it challenging to emerge, as they lacked confidence in competing with China's significantly lower-priced products. To enable them to invest, it is essential to secure demand and markets for their products. This indicates the need for integrated measures on both the supply and demand sides. Based on these experiences, Japan is working to encourage users to fairly evaluate non-price factors, including the resilience of supply chain, by utilizing policy incentives to ensure that companies can secure stable demand. In this way, we are working to diversify our sources of procurement, but another key challenge in this process is ensuring market scale. To achieve competitive costs for alternative suppliers, securing sufficient demand scale is essential. We share this perspective with the EU, and at the recent Japan-EU Regular Summit in July, both leaders agreed to advance such supply chain cooperation as a part of a competitiveness alliance, they agreed. Up to this point, I have discussed ensuring the stability of supply, but I believe that the same can be said for ensuring the stability of demand. Over-reliance on specific buyer countries make it difficult to respond when a disruption occurs. This can be seen as a vulnerability in the market from the supply side, as well as a vulnerability in a supply chain. Thus, ensuring diversity on both the demand and supply side is an effective means of addressing vulnerabilities in economic security. This is why collaboration between the demand side and the supply side is significant. In relation to this, I'd like to briefly mention 3 points regarding the legal framework that supports such resilient supply chains. First, to what extent are policy interventions for building a resilient supply chain permissible? I believe that the necessary measures should focus on diversification of suppliers and buyers rather than decoupling. There must have been some rationality in relying on specific players. Moreover, a certain level of interdependence can serve as the foundation for mutually beneficial economic relations between countries. and also can function as a kind of a safety mechanism to prevent escalation. Second, what should the methods for achieving this be? In our case, we utilize the policy incentives, but these can impose a physical burden and cannot be sustained indefinitely. So it seems appropriate to determine what measures are suitable based on each country's circumstances. Third, how can we ensure that we are reliable supply chain partners? In this regard, the Japan-Australia EPA provides an example. Recognizing the importance of Australian energy resources for Japan's energy security, we established provisions for first consultation in emergency, such as supply disruption, and second, obligation to avoid export restrictions, and third, information sharing and consultation when new regulations are introduced. Japan now relies on Australia for about 40% of its LNG, and I believe that Australia's track record of a stable supply, along with the commitments under this EPA, has supported Japan's increasing dependence on Australia. Finally, based on these points, I'd like to discuss the future, or possible future of the global economic order as the final topic. It goes without saying that restoring the functionality of the WTO, which has been supporting a rule-based multilateral trading order, is an urgent task. On the other hand, as mentioned at the very beginning, many of the measures being taken by both the US and China are aimed at building their own resilient supply chains to varying degrees. A particular concern is that both countries seem to be inclined to complete all supply chains domestically. This is inefficient for both countries and affects our economies as well. In this context, I believe it is important for us to demonstrate an alternative approach to achieve economic prosperity and economic security by building mutually interdependent economic relationships while avoiding excessive dependence on specific suppliers. This cannot be done with just anyone. We need to build such supply chains with trustworthy countries. We should commit to not undermining supply chain cooperation among partners and work together to take necessary measures to avoid excessive dependence on specific countries. I believe it is essential to create such partnerships. Already, among many of our countries, a foundation of trust and cooperation has been established through various EPAs and initiatives like the Asia Zero Emission Community, or AZEC. And I hope we can build on this foundation to advance these efforts. These initiatives, of course, do not exclude the US or China. Rather, I hope that by advancing supply chain cooperation with these two countries, both countries will come to appreciate the value of having reliable partners and will recognize that actions that undermine such supply chain cooperation should not be taken. We are currently in the midst of a green transformation and digital transformation. These involve creating new markets for new technologies and building the new supply chains. Now is indeed a critical opportunity to build resilient supply chains. And we are at a pivotal moment in determining whether we can establish such supply chains or not. Although time is limited, I sincerely hope that this symposium will facilitate open and meaningful exchange of ideas regarding the direction we should aim for and the measures we should take moving forward, providing us with valuable insights. Thank you very much for your attention.